Mm. I've got a different type of stream today. It's probably going to be devoid of most humor or jokes, so it won't do too well with regard to views. But I just wanted to revisit this topic due to some current circumstances. So it may have been a couple of months ago. It may have been a year ago. We talked about, and it's something that I think gets mentioned, more often than that. But just like as the general focus of a stream, for example, that when someone, I guess, has a person they care about die, um, you get a lot of these different characterizations of grief and anguish and things of that nature. And I've always been intrigued by this idea that when someone is like on the receiving end of this happening to them, they're expected to, just kind of walk away and accept what happened and keep pushing forward and all the rest of that stuff. But what I found that made this topic so complex is that there are multiple instances of people in in an objective sense still doing the things they did when that person was around after they passed, but then clearly being affected by it beyond, you know, to an extent that you would really that the idea of them moving on is more debatable than an actual thing that they certainly did. So I guess what I'm getting at here, and I know it's kind of, I'll admit where things may be a little bit difficult to understand. Um, if you have a person who, it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years, still misses someone, still thinks about them regularly, um, even admits that they've been changed in some irrequivocal way since this happened. Did you have to wonder, did that person ever truly move on? Did they actually um, go beyond, being depressed over it? Because I said before, people can be depressed for a very long time and still function in pretty much the same way they did when they were in, I guess, happier times, or just in a good mood perpetually. Because a lot of people online, especially when they talk about this stuff, try to paint people as, I guess you could call it caricatures, or try to shortchange the complexity of human beings and how, for example, you have people that have public personas when they do a video on here. And even in real life, I've always explained that the way you might speak to, or for example, the way I would speak to, let's say, a coworker or someone I'm trying to, let's say, get to hire me, is very different from the way I would speak to some close associate or relative. And you may, in front of the coworker, say, "Oh, yes, I'm having such a great time and I'm in a great mood." But in the case of a person who you're closer to, don't really feel like you have to wear this mask, um, you would say, "Hey, things are terrible," etc. Um, and that's one of the reasons why I've always had such a problem with the concept of therapy, because there are very few people, like, I'll just admit that I feel comfortable. Like, I know with stuff I talk about here, it seems like just stuff is an open book. And I do think in most cases, when it comes to just certain experiences I've had, I'm not too, I guess, resistant to just divulging stuff just to like illustrate a point or make an example. But there are very few people who I feel comfortable talking to about, certain things. Just kind of like, in a metaphorical sense, letting your hair down, lowering your guard with. So to know that there's this really tight knit group of people that you feel that way with, um, even within your own family, and then be told that, oh yes, if you go talk to this random stranger, just pour all this stuff out to them. It's it's never been something that's really sat well with me. Because even if I speak about some stuff, there's still like a barrier there. Like there's certain things that I guess maybe it's like this. A lot of the things that people might consider personal, like just talking about like the romance topic, for example, I've never felt that way about it. But when it comes to stuff like, hey, how do you feel about this person? How do you feel about that like specific people and just certain other stuff, I think I'm that's where I kind of draw the line on, hey, this is not something I really want to talk about. Um, but I've always tried to like, illustrate my points with examples because I think it's helpful toward getting people to understand that whatever emotion someone may feel is seldom exclusive to them, like it's not something that no one else ever felt before. Um, we gave the example of uh just throwing his name out there, just Peter Cushing, the actor, and how he felt as if his life had ended when his wife's did. And he admitted that all of his acting afterward was just him killing time. So even though he still kept acting as he did when she was alive, um, he was basically waiting to die to be reunited with her. And this is someone who lived for 20 something years after she passed. So he clearly wasn't, just rapidly deteriorating. But you really have to stop and ask yourself how much of this stuff can you really say was this person just acting like having moved on? Because again, it's one of those terms or phrases that in a lot of ways is nebulous where people can kind of mold it and shift it to whatever way they want. um but really, I always think when I hear it, it's typically this idea that you have to accept what's happened and either keep moving forward or continue doing new things or things that you enjoy, just stuff like that. But if you have a person who passed that you were close to, it could be friendly, it could be romantic, whichever way you want to use for this example, and you are clearly affected by that person not being around. Um, and it doesn't matter how much time passes, it's this thing, or it is a thing that you remember, that you think about fairly regularly. To what extent did you really move on? And I've always said that before, that I really don't think people should have to move on from someone's death. And what I mean by that is, if you are still able to perform like what's the way of putting it, basic essential task, like going to work, just stuff that you did when the person was around, that keeps your head above water, in a metaphorical sense of like being able to be stable financially. I don't think there's anything else you should have to do. If somebody, like, realistically, um just as an example, if someone, let's say, I'll just give an example that just makes something up. Let's say I got married to some woman and I'm married to her for like 15, 20, 30 years, and then she passes from some illness or car accident, etc. As long as I go to work every day like I did before, does it really is it really a bad thing if I go home and cry my eyes out? That's why I was getting at, that I don't think moving on is something that a lot of people can do. Um in the classical sense of like, oh yeah, this person, I like them, but I have to keep doing my thing. But I also don't think it's something that you really should have to do, provided that you still do, basic functions that you need in order to survive. Oh, I'm getting called. Hold on. So many interruptions every time we do one of these. Um, I guess what I'm really trying to get at here is I just think this topic is interesting and like I don't make it a thing to talk about mental health and people's stability, but I often do believe that a lot of people want to find like they're incentivized by this idea of sensationalism. Like, oh, this person must be suffering from depression because they are sad that one of these people that they cared about passed away and they need to go see a therapist. And I've always said that, like, I, I really feel that in an era where people supposedly are caring more about mental conditions and whatnot, it's almost like there's this knee jerk reaction to try and like create a problem where there isn't one. Um, like they have to make these characterizations of people they barely know to like explain away stuff. Let me see what this is. Oh, ask me to do something I already did. Mm. I mean, we could also talk about Benoit and Eddie Guerrero and how they knew each other for 15 years, and after Guerrero unexpectedly passed, that was such a sad event. Just from like the standpoint of someone that used to watch that stuff or just knew of this stuff, it was really awful. But um, like I've said before that a lot of people are friendly toward each other in this kind of like cordial manner, like, "Oh, how are you?" etc. And the way that the Guerrero and Benoit friendship has always been described by others is like this extremely close, tight knit thing. And it's so interesting because I remember when I was in fifth grade, this is like 2009 or something. One of my instructors said something to the effect of, your classmates are more like your family than your actual family because you spend more time with them, than you do your actual family members. And that's actually something I think relates here, where, because they were both wrestlers working for the same company on these long road trips together, they spent more time around each other than their own families, and it makes a lot of sense that they would be as close as they are, especially after some prolonged period of time, like over 10 years. Um, and that's why I said that when you have a person, and it could be somebody that's 20, 30, 40, 50, it doesn't matter. But if you have a person who for a prolonged, years long amount of time gets used to doing something with someone and something happens, whether the other person passes, can't do it anymore, but something happens to like take away that dynamic, to change that thing they've been used to for years or for some extended period of time. Um, it can be very difficult to just accept, oh, yeah, okay, well, I can't do this anymore. I can't talk to this person anymore. I can't see them anymore. You know, but I remember a lot of times when I was, I think not even just as a kid, but just like reading some of the stuff that people post online, even to this day, where they talk about how, like death is a part of life, right? Beginning and the ends and whatever. But I do think that at a certain point, people just get tired of this stuff as far as like, um, what's a good way of putting it? I guess the reason I don't like that description is because it makes it sound as if you're supposed to just get used to the idea that people you care about are going to like little by little pass away, and then you'll be left here um either to grieve or to just be depressed, and you're supposed to like not be saddened by that or not let it affect you in some shattering way or in some manner that is conducive to like having something ripped away from you permanently that you either loved or enjoyed. I guess I hope that makes sense. That I don't like that characterization of it as just being this fact of life, because there are a lot of people who go extended periods of time without someone dying that they actually care about. I mean, a lot of people, if their parents are younger, like they're going to have them until they're in their 50s or 60s, referring to the child. And then once one of the parents dies, it's supposed to just go, okay, well, that's just how this is. I reject that characterization because I think that relationships are not this thing that you can just take away from somebody, and expect them to, just act normally or otherwise not be affected by it, or to just get over not having it anymore. Let me adjust the camera a little bit. So I don't know. I just find this topic extremely interesting, and I do think one of the biggest flaws of people, because I said before, I think a lot of people don't have empathy unless they've been through something themselves. And I also think a lot of people, when they try to comfort somebody else, either say something that's indirectly offensive, or they try to show a level of compassion that it feels extremely manufactured. So we've discussed this before. You have these relatives, and sometimes like friends of the family, stuff like that, who throughout the whole year, there's 365 days in the year, right? You might see them maybe for three of them, or four, or five, for under 2 weeks a year. You'll see them for some just on and off period. But what I think is so crazy is that, like, you have these people who ignore you. If they speak to you, it's by circumstance, like, oh, I'm at this party and you're at this party. And then when something happens that any person, even a blind man, could see as being like a thing that's supposed to affect you or make you feel depressed, then they come around, oh, how are you doing? Are you all right? And you're just sitting there and you're like, where was this compassion and this concern when you would, like, before this? It's almost October. Where was this compassion from the beginning of the year to August? Why wasn't it here? But that's why I said that I have such a problem with a lot of these people, because, like, I generally try to be consistent. I try to, um not pretend that someone matters more to me than they actually do. And I just can't imagine, like, sitting here. So many phone calls. Oh, so many interruptions. But anyways, as I was saying, I just can't picture a scenario where I have people who I constantly don't talk to or make any attempt to speak to, every year. And then something happens to one of them, whether it's directly to them or indirectly to them. And I'm like, well, I care about you and how are you doing? And are you all right? I don't know. I've always just found it to be so fake. And I've even had some of them, try to do this thing where they're like, we're family. And I said, it doesn't matter. Um, and it doesn't matter simply because, and I've said this before, a lot of people feel like they're entitled to you either liking them or appreciating them or wanting to speak to them or being around them because you're related to them. But as I've said before, you look at their behavior, at their record, they don't talk to you. So it's one of those things where that's why I can't take it seriously. Like you can't sit here and completely ignore somebody every year. Um, and then when something happens, now pretend to just have this extreme concern for their well-being. It's fake. But yeah, I don't know. It just seems like there's this real big push to make mental health this like focus. And a lot of the people that are pushing it are more obnoxious than anything else. And I guess what I think is so interesting is that, like, I remember when I was a kid, like being sad over stuff like, oh, I wanted to go here, but I didn't get to go. And, like sometimes you're sad because of whatever. And I noticed that, like, back then, I didn't have someone saying, "Oh, do you wanna speak to this counselor? Do you wanna speak to this," you didn't have this weird push to try and get you to talk to these strangers, you know what I mean? Like, it's so weird how even as an adult, you're still getting you're, like, you have this, like, more aggressive push of people. And I said before that, in general, I really especially, I'd say probably over, like, the last several years, since I was a teenager, I really don't like, um, talking to strangers about things that actually bother me because they're one, they're usually ill-equipped. Two, they try to, how do I put it this way? Um, I think I mentioned before, like, calling when I was, in high school, that's a certain hotline. We're not gonna say the word because I don't wanna get demonetized, and how, like, I think I told one of the respondents like, "Hey, it would be cool if we could still speak to each other after this call." And then she told me, "Oh, we've had training to where we can't give our number to anyone that call." And I always remember being so disgusted by that, um, because I can't imagine a scenario where if I truly cared about someone and wanting to make sure that they were all right, that they were okay, that they were not, going to do something to themselves or endanger whatever. I can't imagine if I was in if the situation were reversed, I would how to explain it? So the problem with these hotlines is they try to make it seem as if they care about somebody, like they care about your well-being, about how you're doing. That's why they ask you all these questions and ask you what kind of problems you're going through, etc. But you can't make that concern seem anything other than a manufactured metaphorical pat on the back for yourself when you refuse to speak to people that and not because like them personally, but like you have a policy where you can't talk to anyone longer than that one call, or if they happen to call in at the same time that you are available. So yeah, after that, I never called any of those ever again because I knew that, and I don't care who gets mad, those hotlines and all the rest of that stuff, especially the hotlines, are there so that people, these volunteers, can feel better about themselves by doing something that is conventionally considered good. And that's just my opinion. People I know are gonna keep calling those things and talking to them, and that's their prerogative. I'm not gonna waste my time with a group of individuals who say one thing but then do the other. I care so much about how you are doing, random stranger. Oh, what's that? You want to speak to me again? Sorry, our policy prevents us from doing that, but I care so much about you in this one call that we're only ever going to have. You mean the world to me. No, it's just I really don't like discussing a lot of that stuff with people anymore. And it's interesting because when I was younger, I didn't have that same hang up, but I guess what happens is you just get progressively more and more distrusting of people. And sometimes it's not even that, it's just like you really don't enjoy discussing something. Um, but also because like a lot of the times when you meet somebody online, there is this fleeting nature to your interactions with them. The idea that somebody can just click a button and then you're gone forever. And I don't see the point of getting invested in something like that if the other person at any point can just pull the plug and say, forget it, we're never speaking again. So that's why I usually don't tell them about stuff that I really feel, is like down there, like some that just I would usually not say to others. Yeah, my arm's been hurting for the last few weeks or so because all that lifting, probably. Um, I'm not talking about athletic lifting, just lifting some stuff that was very heavy. But I really do wonder what purpose is there to telling somebody to just get over something and to keep moving along or whatever. I don't know. I just always thought it was really tacky because whether people want to admit it or not, there are certain individuals in our lives who play a role that can't be replaced no matter what. Like, and it's not, we're not even talking about like, oh, this is your only mother, your only dad. We're talking about like, um, for example, if something were to happen to my best friend, then I would have, there's about maybe two or three things I talk to him about that I don't talk to with anybody else about. So if he wasn't around, I would again like have like lose a very trusted confidant. Um, and that's something that's extremely unique to my interactions with him. And there's not really anybody else that can kind of fill that niche in the sense that when you have a person who you trust and who you know is not judgmental, who you know is not going to attack you or otherwise say, "Oh my God, what's wrong with you for feeling this way?" It's a lot easier just kind of say, "Hey, this thing is getting on my nerves. It's bothering me." Um, and I don't know, I just like that you have someone who just listens. Just and that's one of the reasons why whenever we talked about the woman stuff, and I'm not going to make it a major focus here, but I just want to make a point. When you get told that you have to constantly do things to impress them and to, woo them and make them interested, all this other manufactured stuff, right? I can't, like, one of the reasons I can't imagine having an actual loving, caring relationship with a woman is because you can't tell somebody to do all this stuff to impress them and then also expect that at some point this person is going to be someone who you can metaphorically put your let your hair down or like actually talk about with things that bother you on some on a more than surface level. And that's what I always liked about my friend. He's just human, like that's someone I can talk to and just be myself. I don't have to sit here and, oh, I hope that I have enough jokes that this person finds comedic. But yeah, I'm not going to turn the stream into talking about that. I just thought that that was a point I wanted to relate that um, you can't tell somebody to like constantly try and impress other people by being something that they are not, or by being something that you think they should be for the purpose of doing that. And then expect them to believe that at some point with that same person who only likes them for things that are not who they actually are, they can talk to them about stuff that actually affects them or bothers them. Just doesn't work. Why did this video get published? So I was looking at this thing on the. It's one of those things where a lot of times you watch something, maybe like as a kid, and then you kind of forget about it. And then time passes and then you see like there's like either an image or some name, and you're like, wait, I think I've heard of this before. A really good example would be the April Tinsley case, for example. That was a little girl that was uh, had her life taken away, unfortunately, by some madman back in the late '80s. Little 8-year-old girl, and I saw the it was America's Most Wanted. They did a profile of it back when I was, I think maybe it's like 2009. Like it's like 11. It was probably the age I was. Um, and I remember distinctively that just every couple of years going back to the case, I'm like, wow, they never solved this. It's been at that time it's been over 20 years and still nothing. And then 4 years ago, they finally got the guy who did it, and I couldn't believe it. But I always remembered that case because, of, like, the part where the killer would go around putting, little weird messages on I think what always fascinated me about the case is that you had this person who did this really evil thing for no reason, which a lot of happens a lot, unfortunately, is people being evil just for the sake of it. And then he starts writing stuff on barns, like on a barn, bragging about what he did, which if I was living around there, I'd be even more afraid. But then he like vanishes for over 10 years and then starts putting pictures of a bedspread and more like threatening messages in the early 2000s. And it was, I guess, what's, and I really don't want to phrase it this way, but the case was interesting to me because it's a guy who, for all intents and purposes, should have just disappeared after 88 after doing this evil thing if they were smart. But because of their ego and their hubris, they decided to keep poking and putting out more evidence that eventually led to his downfall. And I really was disturbed by the parts where he came back in the 2000 because it's like he committed that crime over again back in the 80s, and you would think, okay, well, this person is either deceased now or they're gone. No, he was still there trying to wreak havoc and terror. Some of these cases, I just there's like a picture that's associated with it. I see them like, oh, I know who that is. I think I remember I mentioned that there was a movie I saw. Yeah, it was American History X, and I saw that movie for the first time when it was on TV, and I must have been maybe 5 or 6. Um, like it was one of the first movies I even remember seeing on TV. But I remember that when I was in 12th grade, this movie was played in my psychology class, and the scene I remembered, like, that made me go, "Oh my god, I've seen this movie before," was where it's a black and white flashback of like, I guess, the main character, the mother, her, boyfriend at the time, and I was like, "Wow, I remember this," like, them sitting there, and it's black and white, and the rest of the movie is not like this, and I was just shocked by just by the fact that I remember it after such a, like this film that I hadn't seen over 10 years and hadn't seen since I was a kid at that, and certainly didn't understand the themes and the broader implications and whatnot. That like my memory be triggered by that one part of it that really surprised me. And I don't even like to brag about skills or anything, but just that was shocking for that reason. But anyway, going back to what we were discussing, it's really hard to not be. So I guess what the problem I have with people who characterize someone as being depressed and then they start talking about treatments and stuff is that I really believe that there are certain issues that can't be fixed. Like there are certain things that will happen to a person that there's just no coming back from, um, on sometimes a physical level, sometimes a, I guess, personality, psychological, whatever term you want to use to describe it. But just to give you an example, let's say I have the same cat for 12 years from when I'm in like, I don't know, kindergarten all the way up to the end of 12th grade. Cat's been with me for basically my whole life. And this cat one day just passes away, gets sick, and we put it down. Um, Somebody could say, "Oh, you need to move on." You know, we have medication, we have people you can talk to, but I just this is just my perspective. There's no one I can talk to, no pill I can take that is going to make the hole in my heart not ache. You can't. So I said that I think what ends up happening is there are a lot of people who because the biggest problem I see with others when they talk about this stuff is it's like they don't understand that human beings don't exist in a vacuum, and sometimes there can be nothing wrong with the person physically, but if something happens to someone that they care about, that they love, that they enjoyed spending time with, it affects them negatively. And it affects them in a way to where they're depressed. It affects them in a way to where they're despondent. And sometimes there's no coming back from that. Now, some days they'll be, less depressed than usual and still find stuff to smile about, still enjoy watching something or spending time with maybe another person. But there's no what I hate about a lot of just these people that do the write the comments that recommend stuff is it's like they don't understand. There are certain people in your life, in my life, who are irreplaceable, who no matter what we try to do, no matter what things we embark on, there's no way of ignoring what they meant to us overall. Um, like if I gave the example of my best friend, but if something were to happen to him, I could live another 50 years and I probably wouldn't have a friend like him again. And I certainly wouldn't even bother trying to go out there because that would be disrespectful, in my opinion, to his memory. Like this person you had a very special relationship with, and um, you can't. A lot of times, you can't just have that person be cut out, especially in like what always feels like a really abrupt way. Um, and then expect them to just be able to bounce back, like, okay, I'll just go and meet somebody else. I'll just go and do my usual stuff. Da, 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 da. It's not easy. But that's why I said that people just they don't have empathy or sympathy or any ability to just say, hey, you know what? This person not being around anymore has affected this individual in a way that they very truly may never recover from. Um, and sometimes, again, there's stuff that's just incurable. There are incurable diseases, and there are incurable mental states. Now, some mental states, they don't make you harm others or harm yourself. So again, that's where we start to toe the line on how bad is it really that this person misses this other person. because you know what happened if you didn't miss someone right after something happens to them. You call a psychopath. People say you have no empathy, you have no attachments, or something wrong with you. So you get where pretty much no matter what way you spin it, there's going to be this psychological examination that's done toward you by others who usually don't even talk to you in the first place. Um, but it's just so frustrating because you can have people who are completely physically healthy, and if something happens to someone that they really care about, no matter how healthy they may seem on the outside, they're not that healthy on the inside. And I think a lot of people don't acknowledge the ability by others to compartmentalize, to basically, again, the mask, right? So you go up to your job, you do your task, put up with all the rude stuff from customers, the managers breathing down your neck, and then you go home, you cry your eyes out about that person that you miss. That's why I said that it's people are not as simple as, oh, this person is sad, give them a pill or take them to some random person they've never spoken to before, but they're supposed to tell everything to. Some conditions, be they physical or mental, are just incurable. There's nothing you can do about it. Um, and anything short of that person either getting amnesia or us miraculously now finding a way to resurrect people is it's not going to make them feel any better. Nothing that's given to them or advised, because it's not fixing the overall problem of, hey, here's this very important person that you can no longer speak to, no longer see, and now you're supposed to just go about your usual business. It's not a doable thing. Again, for some people it is, but for others, I really wish this narrative of, oh, just do this, do that. Let me give you this generic saying slash advice. I wish that would just go away. As I said before, that usually if something happens, I prefer to just be alone, just kind of to think about it and whatnot. And people start annoying me when they call and they're pestering you about, or all this other stuff. And it's because I guess um when you're around people, you have to there's always still like this thing of how will you be assessed or judged. And when you're alone, you can just kind of you can scream, you can yell, you can punch or throw something. And no one will be there to stick a finger in your face and say this is weird and you need help and all the rest. Because you're just left to your own vices. And I really wish that was something that more people were allowed to do. I remember having earlier this week someone that was getting on my nerves because they were like, "Oh, uh, you haven't told anyone this week that you wanted to," just all this stupid fake concern. But really, when I've talked about depression and feeling like you want to just leave it all behind, it's because and I felt like this maybe for like the last 5 years, that it seems as if every year the cons get bigger, like the bad stuff just gets larger and larger, and the pros just get tinier and slimmer, and are like withering away. And one of the things that used to intrigue me was the idea that if you keep doing something or putting up with it, maybe something will change, right? That was like just out of curiosity, will this get any better? um but if things are only changing in ways that are worse or bad, I don't see a point to sticking around to see any more of it anyway. And that's why I was explaining how I'm always going to be a person who believes that there's a certain amount of effort that people should not be expected to do to get basic rewards. You shouldn't have to spend a whole 2, 3, 4 weeks, possibly even some months working on a video to get more than 100 views. You shouldn't have to apply to hundreds of jobs a year just to get a couple of interviews that go nowhere and be hired once or twice a year and gotten rid of within the month or within a few days. You shouldn't have to talk to hundreds of women just to get one of this group of supposedly very different people to do something as minor as go on a date. Those are just my opinions. I just think that certain stuff should not be as hard as it is. I mean, I didn't create the saying the juice isn't worth the squeeze, but it's one I agree with. I think that there are certain amounts of effort that people expect on the part of others that make the task that or rather the final thing you get from doing that not worth it. So yeah, depression's just kind of a thing I just accepted. And like I sometimes can be self-deprecating, like, all right, well, I'm just gonna get blamed for this anyway. Um, but I mean, like, what other thing would I be expected to do besides try to inject some humor if you have people who are just constantly this is why I said that like I it's so interesting how you'll have people who will accuse you of you know, being too serious and you do these streams, you're like laughing and grinning and whatnot. And then you'll have people who accuse you of lacking confidence, which you're the one that's showing your face while they hide theirs. But I really I just think that people are too quick. And I guess what drives me crazy is that like I expect when someone is trolling on the internet to, they write something dumb, they get deleted, whatever. But a lot of these people are writing stuff that they want that if by any indication or metric, they want you to read, they want you to take seriously. They are writing stuff with the belief that it's something that should seriously be considered. It's not just a person making like a joke at your expense, for example. And but so much of it just seems very generic and like you pick this out of the back of a book or out of the back of a billboard or some commercial. I mean, when you have people who say, "Oh, I know this is bad now, but it gets better." What proof do you have to even go along with that? And I've had multiple people who I'm around, something happens to someone they care about. I don't tell them it gets better. I might ask them how they're doing, but that's about it. I knew a woman whose mother ended it all. And you know what that means? When her daughter was 12. And I didn't say anything about, oh, you should you get old because it's not my place to tell them that. It's not my place to try and give some act as if I'm some authority on how long you can be sad over something. It's just one of those things that I wish people would stop, like conjuring, like, oh, you must do this for that. I really don't like it because it feels like it's them trying to impose their view on me. Like, look, if you can have this stuff happen, and I guess move on, get over it, good for you. But some people, I don't want to call it not as strong because again, I don't I think that's insulting to say that somebody's not as strong if they're sad over something. Like just it's weird. But I probably would say some people react to things differently, and you can't expect others to do the same thing as you would in every instance, which seems to be the basis for a lot of people when they talk about this stuff. Um, but I don't know what causes them to have these like knee jerk, very simplistic, self-serving responses. And when I say self-serving, I'm talking about the fact that I do think a lot of these people say this stuff to make themselves feel better. About someone else's situation, to like to basically in the back of their mind convince themselves, "Oh, I'm a good person because I asked this other person how they were doing, and I feigned concern for them. I'm really a decent human being." That's a genuine belief I have because like I don't see any other reason why you would go up to someone who you never talk to, you never speak with, you never interact with you. If you talk to them at all, it's because they happen to be in the same place as you are. I don't know what other basis there would be for that to occur as far as like saying something to them and trying to, make them feel better. Then if you're just another one of these people who feels like they should be able to just go up to somebody and go, "Oh, you feel bad? Well, oh well, me too." It's just my opinion. I don't like this stuff at all. Because people are just so desperate to always like try and give their version of comfort. And I just don't think most of them are do it in a way that is sad. And that's why I said I'd rather just when something happens be left alone because they're not helpful. They're not saying anything that is remotely comforting or that you would even want to hear in any normal circumstance because in normal circumstances they ignore you. When something bad happens, all the people that sit there and they say they care about you and how are you feeling and whatnot, give it a couple of weeks, a month, maybe even 6 weeks, they'll be gone. They won't call you. They won't come to visit you. It doesn't matter to them. It's all temporary, fake concern. This person gets to say, "Look at how good I am. That I showed interest in how this other individual was doing. I'm such an upstanding human being." I really am sorry for the interruptions earlier. It was just kind of one of those things where people keep calling over and over. And they don't know if I'm doing one of these or not. So I think we reached the last one, and we won't get any more for the rest of this. I'm not going to go on too much longer because again, like we see the writing on the wall with this stuff. So I try to not make these topics like clash with one another, and I swear I bring stuff up just as examples of what I'm talking about. Um, but I've been thinking, especially over like the course of maybe the last year up until now, I've been thinking a lot about Ted Kennedy and how if you look at his life from like 63 to set like in this 10-year period, he first he loses his brother who is the sitting US president. Then he's in a plane crash that almost kills him, where he's like hospitalized for months. Then his other brother is killed. Then his dad dies the year after that. Then he gets in this scandal with this woman in a car where she passes away. Actually, I have those last two flipped around, but then his son has to have his leg amputated from I think that was cancer. So what I'm saying is on just a purely personal level, that's like a really traumatic series of events, and I guess in reading about him and knowing about, like, all the drinking he did, it's like I've never been into alcohol, for example, or even tried it because I don't wanna get addicted. Um, like, I don't even wanna face the possibility of getting addicted, but whatever personal foibles he had with drinking, I understand. I mean, if I had 2 siblings, get killed, I don't even want to imagine what type of reaction I would have. I'm just mentioning the drinking thing because that's like another example of what I was talking about. I said people handle this stuff in different ways. And now I'm reminded of that one woman who was on Discord and she was like, "You've never been drunk before?" Told you people have no empathy. I guess what drives me crazy is that there's a whole bunch of people who don't drink, you know? There's a whole bunch of people that just are not interested in that. I don't know, it's just I just was irritated or like annoyed because it's not one of these things where because she's an alcoholic that can't go a day without swallowing something, you must have been you're it's like this big, huge, colossal shock to her to meet anyone that isn't interested in that. Oh man. So I said people have no empathy unless something's happened to them. I'm not even joking when I say that I might actually go to sleep after this stream is over because I went to sleep at like 1 in the morning, one something, and woke up at 8. It feels like I can never get a full 8 hours for some reason. But even the 2 days before that, where it was like, you go to sleep at 2 and you wake up at 8, and then like it. I don't know. It just seems like it's this thing where if I took one, it'd probably be like 2 hours because I'm just not really feeling that great like with a lot of this stuff. And I don't know. I really think that people would be so much better off if they just stopped lying to themselves and they stopped trying to, um, I guess, put on this front of everything being something that has to happen or that is going to happen eventually. Because, like, if I have, how do I explain it, a friend who is 10 years older than me, and this person ends up being like 90 when I'm 80, and then they pass away. I said, okay, well, you know what? I got 60, I got, what was it, 40, 50 years with them. I'm content. But, and, they kind of were like talking about health issues. So it was like something that we expected sooner or later. But with a lot of these other people, it really feels extremely abrupt. Like to see people who can, you know, drive themselves places, and then like a couple of weeks later, they're deceased. That's the kind of stuff that really pisses me off because there really is no long-term preparing preparing for the worst. There's no how do I explain it? It's one of those things where things just progressively get worse and worse in a very short amount of time. So it's harder to just sit there and be like, okay, well, if this happens, I can do this, I can lean on that. You really don't have the ability to do that because there's so much bad stuff just constantly pouring down. Some Iowa number. Um, but like I said, I really wish that people would stop pretending that when things happen to someone, they can just walk away from it. Because the reason I brought up Ted Kennedy earlier is because I found an interview with him from, I think it was 99, where he talked about he thinks of his brother every day, and this is like over 30 years after his death. So no matter how much time had passed, he still thought about him constantly, regularly, daily. Um, and see, that's the ultimate showing of whether someone left. I guess I don't want to use the word legacy, but someone actually mattered to you. If even when you're not around them, you still think of them. You still want to talk to them. Because, like I said, um, it doesn't matter how much time passes with certain stuff, which is why I don't sit here and try to delude myself into thinking, oh, by 2024, this won't bother me anymore. By 2030, I'll be okay. I might not even be alive in 2030. I mean, you can't predict anything anymore, but it's like between all these different illnesses and viruses and people running around with firearms everywhere they go, and it's I don't know, it's just harder to be like excited at the future as things are currently going out. And of course there are certain things, I'd like to do, but it's I'm not going to kick myself too much if I don't get to do them because I know I made an effort. Um, but it's one of those things where it's harder to be excited for prospective things and future events when you don't have certain people there with you, um, and it can make you nostalgic for the past because those earlier periods of your life actually had everybody instead of 90% of the ones you cared about, or 80%, and that number just gets lower and lower and lower and lower and lower every it feels like either every year or every other year. So yeah, I don't know, I just this stuff can be hard to discuss. Even in like the abstract way I'm doing it here, it's still tough. And I feel like it'd be even worse if I just came out and said different things because that involves entirely admitting stuff, and I don't really feel like doing that. But I guess just to close this out, there are relationships that we have that are irreplaceable, very important, and and I'm saying this with complete honesty. Um, in a lot of cases, whether someone passes or not, it doesn't matter how much time passes. This is still going to be something that mattered and that you feel the absence of. So I fully expect for things to get worse. And, I like to be surprised, but I'm just going off of basic pattern recognition skills. Um, but yeah, moving on is something that I think is a nebulous concept. And I believe that if a person continues to do the things that they did when that other person was around, they shouldn't feel bad about constantly missing them. If it doesn't distract from a steady workflow or from them achieving whatever dream or goal they had previously, um, you shouldn't beat yourself up over it. Because, like I said, human beings in a lot of cases have strong bonds with each other, and you can't just pretend it didn't happen. And I think a lot of people, when they constantly think of someone, they feel like if they didn't, it would be like a disservice to what that person meant to them, or it's like incredibly hard not to, which I certainly know the feeling of. Um, but yeah, I really, I just wish people would just acknowledge, like, hey, this person is not the same without this other one. And if they want to feel sad or depressed, despondent, as long as it doesn't cut into the stuff they do professionally that keeps a roof above their head, They should be allowed to. And it shouldn't be our place to tell them, "Oh, it's been this many years, it's been this many," because it doesn't matter. Some people spend a whole lifetime being sad about someone's passing. So, thanks for showing up, and, I'll be back on, Saturday. So I guess this is the last stream of the month. See ya.